we are pleased to welcome Dr. Roy Robson as our keynote speaker for the Great Lenten Lecture Series 2015. I put on the flyer some of the publications that Dr. Robson is responsible for. He's also, for our parish, probably most importantly responsible for being the second reader of my dissertation and actually passing me, and I thank him very much for that.
And for the donations you gave, so he could get paid.
They actually weren't supposed to know about that, but that's okay. So, Dr. Robson grew up, well, he'll tell you some of his background, but I'll tell you that this is going to be a wonderful lecture and well worth being attentive to, so please do so. Let's keep the side conversations to a minimum, and the children listening and attentive. Without further ado, Dr. Robson.
So, two things that I wanted to say real quickly before actually doing the thing that I'm, the dance that I'm doing for my dinner. The first is, this whole thing, sort of church into trapeza thing, is unbelievably cool, right? It is. If you guys ever watch movies with, like the ships on the high seas, and somebody always calls, battle stations, and then you hear, battle stations, and then suddenly all of the guys, do all this crazy stuff, and what looked like a merchant ship is suddenly, it's a gunboat immediately, right? And that's exactly how it looked to me when I was watching this. It was just so fun to watch and so incredibly moving. And that leads me to the other thing, and I'm not a person who, I have no responsibility to say this, I have no way to really judge, but I have to say, I think this is the coolest parish I've ever been to. It is really, you guys are amazing. Just this sort of living, breathing, exciting kind of energy. It is really remarkable. So thank you. It's an amazing honor to be here. Father said that I talk about myself for a minute, so I will for like 30 seconds. I'm a professor of history, but I teach in a place where I get the opportunity to nose around and do some other things. So I also do quite a lot of work in religious studies, and even in sort of the relationship of physics to history and religion a little bit. A lot of what I teach is a course on the meaning of time, which is a lot of fun. My background, specialty, is as a Russian historian, and my sort of subspecialty is that of religion, especially the Orthodox Church. My subspecialty for a long time has been the study of the Old Belief. And though I am a beardless one, I am an Old Believer. I grew up in an Old Believer community in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is a funny, odd sort of American-Russian thing to have done. And I'd be glad to talk about it if anybody wants to. It's a pretty neat place. And in terms of the things that I tend to be interested in, it's almost always how people live religion. So if this is even a thing called studying lived religion. So I'm not a theologian. I always want to say, but I play one on TV. I'm not a theologian. I'm a historian, but I'm really interested in the faith from the bottom up. So the book I'm working on right now has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, but it's called Living Religion in 20th Century Russia, and it will be a study just about how everyday people live their lives under the communist regime. What did they do? What did they have to do? How did they have to do? What sort of creative things were necessary for them to survive during the communist years? So that'll come out at some point in the next, year and a half or so, something like that. But what I wanted to ask you about today, or wanted to talk about, was something really different. I'm always intrigued when there's something in the liturgy that just zips by you, right? Like most things do, because the liturgy is sort of zipping along. And then later on you think, well, that was kind of neat. Why do we have that? Why do we do that? So for a number of years now, I've been really intrigued by the Polyaelios, and specifically the polyelios of the Transfiguration. So, all right, now I realize I've lost most of you. You've gone to sleep. That's totally cool. I don't mind. Sorry. But if I might, I want to describe that for you as I understand it, and then talk about how I, as a scholar, interpret it and what I think it means, and what it might mean for us living in a world that is not very orthodox. So I'll read a little bit about this because I don't want to forget it. So on the evening of the 5th of August every year, Orthodox Christians around the world prepare for the Feast of the Transfiguration. Just before the Gospel comes to Polyelios, a liturgical moment that I would argue is full of lots of very cool things: fragrance and light and movement and text and image and music and gesture and also local and national traditions. So if you've been to services, you'll kind of start to get this, or sort of remember where it is if you're not sure. It comes at the beginning of the vigil, just after the choir sings verses from Psalms 135 and 136. And then the clergy come to the altar, and they come and they stand in front of the icon of the Transfiguration as we have it right here. So we're sort of pretending, except for the food, which is a local tradition, really. That's what this is. And then in the Russian tradition, while this is happening, this is a little bit different among the Greeks, but in the Russian tradition, the clergy and then the choir have a responsorial chant, so we're a chant and response, right, of the Magnification hymn. And this is going on while then the priest is walking around the icon and censing it with a censer, right? And the clergy and then the people sing, we magnify you, O Christ, the giver of life, and we honor the all-glorious transfiguration of your most pure body. So I would further sort of like to point out that this whole thing is very rich, right? So you have the Magnification of itself, which is very, very dramatic, right? It's a verse in response. It's not just the Baptists who do that, we do it too. There's incense that's sort of billowing up, right? If you have bells on your censers, there's a tinkle, 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 and that's the bell sound that I'm trying to do. The flowing clerical robes, right? And then you have the icon here, which would be often covered with or surrounded by flowers. And then, if you were in the Greek tradition, there might be the smell of grapes, because people would bring grapes to the Transfiguration. If you're in the Russian tradition, anyone, what do you call it? What is it? Right, Yablonny spots, right? It's the apple savior, right? And so there's this, you bring apples in there. And so with all of this, right, you've got this censer, you've got the robes, you've got the singing, you've got the movement, and you've got this wonderful smell of either apples or grapes. So this is a kind of a full body experience, I think. And easy to let it pass and not notice how interesting it is and how important it is and what it can teach us, in my opinion, for life outside of the church. So just to keep going then, the deacon will come along, and there's a small litany, thank God it's not a long one, and then there's a gospel reading, and the priest is preparing for the gospel reading while the choir is singing the Stipiendi, right, the song of ascents from a couple of songs, the name of which I can remember. And then the deacon reads the prokimen, the choir sings a response, again there's a kind of call and response, and then the priest reads the gospel for the day. And I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read you one little piece of it. So the priest says, at that time, Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up to the mountain to pray. As he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered. It almost makes you cry when you read this. It's really amazing stuff. And his robe became white and glistening. And behold, two men talked with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. But Peter and those with him were heavy with sleep. And when they were fully awake, they saw his glory, and the two men stood with him. Right? So then, after that, the choir right away begins to sing the canon of the Transfiguration. And then we all of the people get to sort of come into the middle, right? And you kiss the icon, you turn to the priest, you paste olive oil on your foreheads. And then, in the Greek tradition, something I've never seen, but I would really like to, there is in some places, especially in monasteries, a thing called the polyolios chandelier, which is this big chandelier, yeah. And they swing it back and forth, or they kind of twist it, right? And as it's happening, there's olive oil like sloshing out, right, on top of everybody. And in fact, the polyolios means much oil, or a lot of oil. But, and this I think is in some ways key to my understanding of this, it has also come to mean something else. It has come to mean much mercy. The word started out with one meaning, and without losing that one meaning, it gained another meaning in this context. So then if you or anyone else is coming up to venerate the icon, you'd see it up here, right? So you see you have Christ here. And I just want to point out a couple of neat things. So you have the two prophets on either side. You notice that there's no white, there's no mandorla of white about them, but they're the same size, right, as Christ. And even you've got some sleeping disciples down here. It's like, yeah, fall asleep. But even they are the same size, right? They're not smaller, they're not further away, they're the same size as Christ and as the prophets. And they even wear similar clothing. And so the idea here, I think, is twofold. First is to remind us about the transfiguration of Christ. The Christ as, in this point, for the first time for humans, is perfect man and perfect God. And the two human beings, right, Elijah and Moses, are hanging out on either side of him and saying, see, this guy is perfect man and perfect God. He's the real thing, right? And then you've got your sort of sleeping guys down here, but even they're not smaller, they don't have worse clothes on. Even they can be just as important as the prophets. Right? Because as Orthodox, the one thing we all believe, the one thing we all agree on, is that God became man so that man could become God, as St. Athanasius said. Right? And this is it. This is the picture of what we can be, right? Of what human beings can be. What we can transform into as Christians. This is a big deal, I think. One of the things you read about often is that the saints are talking face to face with God. That they're up there, they're at the same level. Elijah and Moses are at the same level. But they're not talking about prophecy, they're explaining, right? They're showing to us how God and human can come in together. Right? The choir reinforces the message, right? And the choir is singing at the same time, right? So all of these things are going on at the same time. The choir is singing, being complete God, thou hast become complete man, bringing together manhood and the complete Godhead in thy person, which Moses and Elijah saw on Mount Tabor in the two natures. So after we bow and we kiss the icon and we turn to the priest and receive a blessing of oil, an anointment, then the church, sort of gets a little quiet. There's a kind of a gloaming, a kind of quiet darkness that falls over the church during the rest of the canon. And we've now finished this remarkable little piece of liturgical life. And I'd like to sort of play with that a little bit more. So part of this is a kind of a narrative, right? There's litany, prokimen, gospel reading. We know kind of a narrative arc, right, if we were English majors. Other things happen on top of one another, right? So there's sensing while there's singing, and there's singing of the canon, while there's kissing, and then there's kissing, and then there's bowing, and then there's oil. So there's part of it that's going on all one on top of another. And then on top of all of that, we have the two meanings of polyolios, right? Mercy and oil. And then on top of that, we have the agricultural calendar of the first fruits of the summer, right? Of apples and of grapes. So, who cares, right? Like, why are you making me listen to all of this? Partly because it's cool and because I get to talk right now, so you have to listen. But more importantly, I think that I would like to say that there's a way in which the polyolios is a kernel of orthodoxy, the kernel of the Christian life, and how we can think about life outside these four quite wonderful walls. I would argue to you that the polyolios is most of all a conversation. It's a conversation among all of those things that I just described. And because it's a conversation, it includes people. It includes you and me, it includes the clergy, and it includes the God, and includes the choir, and for close to God, the choir director. And so there's this feeling that this is not just something we're watching. It's not a show. It's a conversation. And you know what? It's a conversation that's different in every church, even though it's the same in every church, right? Because there's different people, it's a different kind of laud and incense, it's a different kind of fruit maybe, it's a different look of the church, it's cold or it's hot or it's early or it's late. And then from year to year it's a little bit different too, because there are different people, there are new children, people pass away. So I think that this is it, right? I think that the Polyolios is a conversation. And it's a conversation that is among all of us, and it's with us and the past, and it's with us and the future, or even more so, the timelessness of God. But it is a conversation, it's not a show, it's not something we're watching on TV. We're all part of it. Even if you're not actually taking part, you really are. You're there, you're creating body heat, you're kissing icons, you're doing all kinds, you're part of the thing, right? We all are part of that. And I think in that way the Polyolios is an icon just like an icon is. In that it's a reminder, a model, it's an icon of how we might live our life, how we might interact with people, how we might think about people. So here's my idea. Here's my idea of the Polyolios as the model for our world outside these walls. I was thinking about that coming here, right, because I was on the plane with a big, very joyous-looking Muslim family. It's like, right, Detroit, right? This is very Arab up there. There's a lot of people from a lot of lands that live near us here, near you here. So it reminded me of that. And I have, I guess, 5 maybe ideas. The first is, like the Polyolios, I would argue that the liturgy and our faith teaches us that what we are is in constant conversation with everyone around us. That we are neither listening nor are we lecturing, although actually that's not true because, right, I'm lecturing and you're kind of listening. But in most of the time, right, we're in a conversation with one another. And that's the kernel of the Polyolios. It's this sacred conversation. It's this sacred experience, and that all of those pieces become something bigger than just one or another piece of it. Which means, though, that when we're outside, we have to accept that the people out there that we don't like or that are not like us are people with whom we have a conversation too. And that they are humans just like the rest of us. And though they may even hate us and certainly not know anything about us or understand us, it's no different than the Polyolios in that we're in conversation with them, or we ought to be in conversation with them. The second thing is that I think that the truth of the Polyolios is this thing that is true, and it is unchanging, right? Because it is Christ, it is the church, it is an unchanging thing. But yet, in a funny way, it is always changing, because the people are different, and the incense is different, and the apples are different. And I would say that that's the next thing that I believe the Polyolios is teaching us. And that is that in our conversation with all of the different people that were here at the table or somewhere else, that the truth resides in that experience. That, and I'll come back to this at the end, that we are pravoslavia. And we believe in the truth, and we believe in an overarching universal truth. But it seems to me we might understand that truth as living amongst us in that conversation, and that the truth is something we experience through the conversations we're having in the Polyolios, or in the trapeza, or when somebody is giving you an unfortunate gesture on the interstate. It's still a conversation. And that conversation includes people of different education, different gender, different occupations, different look, different colors. But that like the polyelios, they and we can have more than one meaning. Right? The polyelios started out meaning just a lot of oil, and now means a lot of oil and a lot of mercy. And that conversation, that life of conversation that we have with these people, even if we don't like them, or if we do, it's nice, a little easier to do, right? Is one that ultimately not only can reveal the truth to us, but can change us, right? It can transfigure us. And it can transfigure them, too. We may never see it, right? You may wave somebody on, not wave somebody, you may wave somebody into traffic, and they're having a terrible day, and then they think, oh, maybe I won't go home and beat my kid, because things are maybe not as bad as it went. I don't know what that's going to happen, but the point here is that our interaction with each other and our interaction with everyone outside of here can be a transformational one. It can be a transfigurative one. It can be an iconic one, right? And that it doesn't necessarily have to be a show or a lecture or a narration. It can be a conversation. And that if it's a conversation, these other people have a role too, right? If it's the person who's picking apples, or the person who is singing, or the guy who is bagging groceries and putting eggs at the bottom of the bag, or the guy that cuts you off on the highway, right? There's a way in which this is a conversation. Right? It's not necessarily a time for a lecture. It's not necessarily a time for a rude gesture that I might have used once or twice. It is, in fact, a time for a conversation in any sort of small way. And remember, I think also, my last sort of big point about the polyelios is that it is universal, that all humans have the opportunity for transfiguration. We can all be God because God became man. And that the ones we expect to be the best conversationalists, the smartest ones, or the prettiest ones, or the ones with the nice clothes, may actually be the ones that have fallen asleep. That the ones you expect to have the conversation might be snoozing, right? And that the ones you end up having a conversation with may not be the ones you were expecting. So, I'd like to think about that, right? I'd like to think about that. I like to think that our little 10-minute experience there at the polyelios, or the hundreds or thousands of them we have during the liturgical year, can do that for us, right? Can both transfigure us, but it can take us. It can give us a very real sort of model on how we might work. And it's a conversational model, right? It's not a TV show. It's not a movie. It's not a football game, which I love, right? But it's a conversation. It's a conversation among all of these different things. And if I leave you with one thing, it's something that makes me nuts, and I'm going to tell you because it makes me nuts. Whenever someone says to me, "This is Orthodox, what does this Orthodox mean?" Right? The standard answer is always true belief, right? Orthodoxy is true belief. Well, those of you who are Russian speakers know that this is actually not true, right? Orthodoxy is pravoslavia. It is true glorification, right? It is true glorifying. It is the doxology, right, if you're a Latin scholar. If you're a Greek scholar. Right? So I had various people like I could imagine them hitting me from the back of the head. And I think this is key. It is, at least for me, that if we think of Orthodoxy as true glorifying, first it reminds us of whom are we glorifying? We're glorifying God. But of course, God doesn't need to be glorified. God's God, right? He doesn't need anything, right? That's the great thing about being God. He's God. He doesn't need the glorification. We need the glorification, right? But the glorification that we need to give God is not by ourselves, and it's not only in Church Slavonic, and it's not only in English, and it's not only in Greek, and it's not only with the pravoslavia. Right? It's not only with the Orthodox. The glorification says to us that we are in communication. We, if we like it or not, have all these people around us. And that can help us to glorify And we may even, in a tiny little bit, might be able to help them to glorify and be transfigured. So